What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy Hudak, and this is probably the most somber feeling that I've started recording an episode since beginning this show in May. And I just think that goes to show how important Willie Fritz was as a head coach and as a person to everyone that's feeling this emotional void. I usually reserve these Tuesday episodes for my post-game analysis of Tulane football, even though I started this show out not really specific to a team. And even though I've really focused on Tulane in the offseason, I still want to talk about a lot of bigger ideas. But quite honestly, I just have felt like a lot of those bigger life lessons and lessons within football I've been able to find within Tulane's program. And so it's made it an easy season for me in that regard. This is a very difficult one. A lot of what made that easy was all of the principles that I was drawing from head coach Willie Fritz. And I'm not going to lie, rewatching this game was a tough one, and going over what went wrong in that game just doesn't really seem that productive right now. There's plenty of time between now and the Military Bowl, where Tulane will be playing Virginia Tech on December 27th. I'm really looking forward to going to Annapolis, as we haven't been there since I began here. All of that to say, there's weeks to be had about breaking down that and looking forward for the end of the season, but it just doesn't really feel appropriate in this moment to go over that game. I think anyone that was at that game could feel it in the air. And this is really no fault of anyone involved. It's a lose-lose situation. There is no blueprint. There is no manual. And every coach that handles it one way, you could make the argument for another coach that handled it the way you might have wanted it to, and then everything went wrong. This is what happens when you sustain success. And it's not limited to just G5 programs. Power 5 schools, Power 4, whatever is happening right now, it's eventually going to become Power 2 and then all blow up. All that to say, even looking at those giant super conferences right now, there is a massive tier level going on within those conferences, within each one. And so all that to say, there's always going to be a better opportunity, a better fit for a coach. And for what reason or another, and again, we could go over, I think, what some of the valid brought up reasons are. I just want to kind of stop the train of everyone just kind of devolving, for lack of a better term. And I'm not going to tell anyone to not feel the way that they feel. This reaction reminds me in a way to Sean Payton leaving the New Orleans Saints. There were a lot of hurt feelings, and within those hurt feelings, there was a lot of just emotions and positive ones at that. Just feeling this emotional void that good football just wasn't necessarily going to solve. With Sean Payton, it's saving the city of New Orleans from Hurricane Katrina, resurrecting a football team in a city all in one. Argument also goes towards Drew Brees, but what Willie Fritz has done for Tulane football, for Tulane University, just their perception and looking at application rates alone, I mean, his impact at Tulane really can't be understated. And Willie Fritz started at the junior college level. He worked his way up the ladder from every position possible. He would drive the bus with his players on it 2 games. He would paint the field because there was no one there to do these things at those levels. And he slowly worked his way up. And the last level that he had yet to reach was Power 5. Again, just looking back at Sean Payton, there are some coaches that want to go win a Super Bowl on 2 different teams. It's just hard to really knock someone for accomplishing as much as they did in their career and having that next ring be available to them and deciding not to take it for one reason or another. So, that's something that, yes, we could talk about Tulane not being in a Power 5 conference up to this point. I think what's more valuable right now is discussing how to get there. And quite honestly, the first step on that is showing up against Virginia Tech and beating credibly what could be looked at as a potential future conference opponent if those teams that are, rumors to leave the ACC end up leaving. They're looking for schools to add. Tulane makes sense there. There could be another wave of adding teams. And really just, again, what's the most important thing right now is Tulane positioning themselves to be in that role. It is a valid conversation that we can bring up in terms of why Tulane lost Willie Fritz. But, if we get there in 2 more years, then it's just sometimes timing in life sucks. Sometimes the right opportunity comes up in the right moment, and it's somewhere where he spent a lot of time at Sam Houston, and he has family that lives there. His daughter lives there. And yes, I know it's a short plane ride away, but family is just something that is going to be really hard to, have a rational conversation about anything else, because it's ultimately that's emotions involved. And it's not a bad thing. I'm not knocking it whatsoever, but when there's more involved than just on paper football, it's a tough situation. The other priority for Tulane is what I think everyone has identified as the obvious in building an indoor practice facility. When you look at the championship game on Saturday, I was so impressed. And I am still so impressed by the turnout to that game, by the turnout of those student sections, considering what went wrong that morning. When I woke up, I had texts from people saying that their homes were flooded. We woke up to a lot of the city having, there was houses in Hurricane Katrina that only had a foot or two of water damage. The issue was they weren't able to get back into their homes. And so the entire thing molded up. It's not necessarily what's going to happen here, but that was as bad of a situation that you could ask for, waking up in the morning and then every turbine in the city breaking. I don't even, whatever, I'm not even going there on this show, but that was something that an indoor practice facility is not going to solve. If people can't get to a game, they can't get to a game. Thankfully, everything cleared by then, but it's also something that if there's a delay during a game, there's a lightning delay. I mean, that happened in 2 NFL games this last weekend, I believe. That's just something that's unavoidable. But losing out on practices and the money that it takes to bus to and from back to the New Orleans Saints practice facility, we do live in a city where the climate does really demand the necessity of an indoor practice facility. So I think, again, while we're reeling in these emotions and coming to terms with, and I think it's fair to say people are grieving a loss here. And when you're grieving a loss, your feelings aren't going to be rational, and it's really going to be hard to see the forest for the trees. So I do want to allow everyone to grieve. I do just want to remind everyone that everything you say on social media, everyone can see that. That includes current coaching staff members, current players, and the worst thing that could happen at this point would be for everyone to abandon the guys that are sticking around when the going gets really tough here. Just as the guys stuck around after the 2-10 season, the guys that have already made those commitments, like Cam Pettislow and Tyler Grubbs being such this leader in just a short period of time, those are 2 guys that only came this year, and they were able to see what was being built here and understand how important it is for leaders to step up right now and make those types of commitments. It's just as important for fans to really support these guys and get behind them, and don't leave the program now. Like I said, grieve your losses. If you decide after this season that you're done with Tulane football, that's a conversation for another day, but this season isn't over yet. And the other thing that I do want to say before I kind of dive into this is I think we don't know enough ever. And that's a life lesson that I think we could apply to a lot of things, but especially with the consideration to Tulane's new athletic director, David Harris, and his ability to really do anything about this situation here. It's not like he could come in and construct an indoor practice facility overnight, if that's the sticking point. It's not as if he'd be able to come in here and change that much stuff in, a week's time period. And from what we've seen, Tulane made their best offer, and it just wasn't enough. Sometimes that's life. I was raised by attorney, a paralegal, just very cynical, life is not fair. It just is what it is. And you just have to deal with the cards that you're dealt. That is kind of how I feel about this situation right now. But I think Tulane of the past, because I understand I was 4 when Tulane went undefeated in the 1998 year. So I understand that there is just decades of feelings that I'm not going to try to explain away for a lot of fans here, but everything kind of fell apart after that. There was really nothing that was built and sustained, though, up to that point. It was this magical 1998 year, and it was just a flash in the pan. Even though Tulane lost the championship game this last weekend, I mean, there's one spot for all G5 leagues in the New Year's Six. So this was the other option, if not the New Year's Six, was every other pretty much G5 and most Power 5 teams at that. Tulane gets a good prestigious poll against a Power 5 opponent, and an opportunity to finish the season out with a 1-0 and really show that Tulane football isn't done yet. And so I just feel like being a part of that in this moment right now, that involves really just kind of supporting everyone through this. And in terms of, who should have been named the interim head coach, whatever conversation you want to have, Slade Nagel is prepared to deal with this. He has been on this staff as long as Willie Fritz. And this is how you stop a dam from breaking. I know that there have been a few players that have entered the transfer portal: Carson Haggard, Kai Horton, Chris Brazel. Another unavoidable thing. And there's a reason why that rule exists in the transfer portal, in that you're allowed to transfer if your head coach departs, because you don't really know what's next. And players can always withdraw from the portal. It's not always guaranteed by their university, but this is just what happens when you lose a head coach. I would, again, implore everyone to really focus on the good here in this situation and the stability that is still going on here for Tulane, and have this conversation about what can be done without losing the sight of the forest or the trees here. And for Tulane to say that they are in a position to be hiring someone at the end of this week for this new job and employing a national search firm to do that as well, that does not mean that they are just rolling over here. In fact, it's really the exact opposite. And I'm just reading between the lines here. I'm entirely speculating, just to throw that out there. I don't know anything about this, but on its face, I don't think that a search firm gets assembled with no candidates in mind and you have a decision to be made by Friday. It wouldn't surprise me if either Tulane identified candidates in the last couple of weeks, gave them to this search firm, and then they're going to do that final process this week. Or, it's not like you can announce that you have a search firm employed looking, and just in case your head coach ends up leaving. So in terms of them announcing that now, I mean, it's not really an appropriate thing to announce prior. And, that decision for Willie Fritz hadn't been made until either Saturday night or Sunday morning. I quite honestly don't remember. All that to say, after the game. And this to me is the most encouraging thing, that I know that the athletic director search kind of dragged on for a lot of people. And I think that there's a lot of things that, again, we could talk about in terms of what played a role in this departure here, but Tulane is being extremely proactive on this one. And it just shows a commitment to football, even though there hasn't been a hire yet. And this all could rest on, who they end up hiring, but it just feels different, even though everything is, completely without the leader at the top. I mean, the truest leader and true legacies, that still remains after, you leave. And as much as people talked about, guys like Nick Anderson and Dorian Williams leaving last year, yes, you could point to Willie Fritz being there still, but there have been so many guys, there have been so many factors and coaches that have been so important to this run for Tulane over the last 2 years and rebuilding back from that 2-10 season, that this program is still going to continue on. And it's really important that they have the support of this fan base when the going gets tough. I think there's a lot of things here that make this just sting a little bit more. Really, the big things being all of them unavoidable, all of them in an ever-changing landscape of college football, and all ones that unfortunately just exist and are what they are. And to me, it's the timing of this, it's the factors involved in his departure, and it's the existence of this system of college being what it is with the transfer portal, but what really building a program means and what leaving that behind really means. So to start with the timing on things here, the system is literally built at this point to put teams that succeed at an extreme disadvantage here. You just think about the fact that teams that don't do well, they don't have to really worry about this. I mean, if someone was looking to poach Willie Fritz after the 2-10 year, there wouldn't have been any issue of timing involved. We saw last year how the timing of this can blow up this type of decision, with Georgia Tech really wanting to announce that hiring move the week of the championship game. And as much as people can go back to Willie Fritz saying that he'd like to retire at Tulane after all of that stuff, people can change their minds. Things can come up that you just didn't expect really to come up, but it's hard for me to ignore that that was something that Willie Fritz, again, had never been to the Power 5 level and was all but going to accept a position last year, but owed it to his guys and ended up turning that down because of it. And I remember that being a really shocking time where a coach stuck to principle in a way that just really wouldn't be expected in any business, let alone college football. You go where the money is, you go where the opportunities are greater in any industry. But the timing just wasn't right last year. Unfortunately, the timing this year was just right enough, but now Tulane is suffering as a result. And that's really no one's fault here, but just again, that the system in place here where the transfer portal opened up today, signing day for your recruits. If you don't have a head coach in place, which we're seeing at Tulane in a way, even though there is an interim named, you want to be able to stop that dam. And it's different in situations where you fire a head coach after a bad season. The sky is kind of falling at that point. Whereas Tulane lost a coach due to the success of the program, much to the credit of Willie Fritz. But to have that opportunity to play in the conference championship game means that this type of thing is at risk of happening. So unfortunately, Willie Fritz, his job now is coaching the Houston team. He had essentially no time to really deal with that other than informing the players, which, he did in person on Sunday. And, I've seen things about Willie Fritz not really having a statement towards Tulane or anything. It's not to say that won't come down the line, but I just keep comparing this to Sean Payton, where, it was on my birthday. So I also have a very vivid memory of this, where he had 2-3 hours to sit down with the media and just have a day-long press conference discussing his time in New Orleans. Because of Tulane's success this year, Willie didn't have that luxury. Tulane didn't have that luxury. And his job now is over in Houston. So unfortunately, that's just is what it is. The head coach of the Tulane football team for right now is Slade Nagel. So the timing of this does suck, but the season's not over, and it does give Tulane a few weeks to regroup. And again, that decision coming fairly early on who that head coach is going to be, then at least both players and everyone else, have the ability to just make that decision for their future. And then just kind of on to the factors of his departure, because the timing stings, but timing is just timing, and this is going to hurt any way that you shake it out. It's just really on the heels of a hard loss where you could just feel, this being in the air affecting the players. And again, there's nothing that you can do about that. Players, at this age, they're still, 18 to 23 years old. It's not the same business like it is in the NFL. And Willie Fritz has really meant a lot to a lot of these guys. And, I'll get to that in a moment here. But in terms of what, we can kind of discuss on leading to his departure. One of those things that I've seen get thrown out there is the fact that he had a really small buyout. If that is true and what's being reported, then yeah, I mean, it's a pretty small buyout for a really, really good head coach, but it's ultimately, one that both sides agree to. I just feel like getting wrapped up in the buyout here is not really the issue. I know there was a report that came out sometime last week in this mess of stuff where, Jeff Traylor's buyout was mentioned as a potential barrier. To me, you don't interview someone 3 times if you're not going to move forward with them whatsoever. And about that buyout from day one. It's Houston. I mean, the reasons that we're talking about the departure there is, facilities, money, what have you, but it's not just really as simple as that. But if Houston wanted Willie Fritz and he had a $7 million buyout, then yeah, they were most likely going to pay that buyout. It just kind of seemed like this was Willie Fritz's job to lose his entire time. And I mean, clearly as things unfolded, that's kind of how it ended up seeming. So I don't really think that a high buyout, one that would have been, really to be expected within this contract here, would have been the end all be all here. I mean, it definitely would have offered Tulane some money in this instance, but now, again, we look at the athletic director having a really low salary here. Tulane has these resources. They have the ability to, again, get through this. And yes, the numbers that they were being reported, if those are true in terms of what they were trying to offer towards Willie Fritz, you'd like Tulane to offer that. Again, if that's true, offer that towards a coach that's worth that amount of money. All of that really remains to be seen. But I think where the money issue really lied here, and it is a fair conversation to be had, is, the ability to retain coaching staff. You just look at Chris Hampton going to Oregon last year. You look at Iman Nagavi, the offensive line coach, who is over at Houston right now. That's an unfortunate thing that exists in the G5 in general. But it's hard to really compete with a team that has now moved on to the Power 5, and the Power 5 being that one level that Willie Fritz hasn't reached in his coaching career. And I think at the end of the day, that would always be a kind of a what if for him if Tulane doesn't end up getting themselves into a Power 5 conference. And maybe if Willie Fritz was 50 years old right now and had that kind of time to wait and see at Tulane, but it just, again, timing is timing, life is life. And when you add family into the situation here, it's really hard to argue with that. But facilities are definitely a conversation that needs to be had. I mean, you just, again, look at inclement weather being a thing here in New Orleans and the amount of practices that have been lost out because Tulane's had to go over to the Saints practice facility, and that's not always available to them because the Saints use it. So they've lost out on practices here and there critically at that. So getting that facility built is really important here. It's important to show a commitment on moving up to the next level for a Power 5. So you can look at that as kind of a factor here. And I don't really know where the blame on that lies, to be entirely honest with you. Those plans were announced right after the Cotton Bowl, and then nothing was really moved on it ever since then. And I'm not really here to point fingers because I really, truly don't have the inner workings here. But if anything, I would be looking a lot more at the athletic director that was in place for, the first 11 months of this year than the one who's been employed for less than a few weeks at this point. In terms of why aren't there plans announced for the indoor practice facility? I don't know how much of that groundwork was or wasn't laid by his predecessor. I'll just say this, from meeting David Harris after his introductory press conference, I actually liked the guy. He didn't sell the kingdom to Tulane fans, but I've always joked about under promise, over deliver. But in that same note, I just don't know how well that would have landed either, of someone coming in here and just kind of throwing things out there without really even being in a position to work on those things yet. And also to say this about, the fact that he's not officially in his job here at Tulane and that he's still wrapping things up at Iowa. I mean, there are planes that exist. It's very easy to get back and forth between one place or another. We all lived through the pandemic where remote work was possible. And I don't know, quite frankly, enough about the day-to-day duties of an athletic director to say really one way or another. And I don't know if any of us can really say for sure. I think all of this really depends on who Tulane ends up hiring on Friday and whether or not that kind of satisfies, fans' idea of who this kind of follow-up to Willie Fritz should be. But I just find it hard to believe that, again, for this to be announced this Friday, that there's no involvement here by this athletic director at all. And especially when, these types of things are being brought up with the reasons why the greatest head coach in Tulane history ended up leaving the program. Tulane's not dumb at the end of the day. And it's going to be really difficult to hire someone in his place without having a plan for those types of things. So it's hard to keep saying wait and see, but when you have a week's timeline here, I think it's fair to just, again, get your kind of emotions and your feelings out this week, but just see what Tulane's next move is before making your end all be all opinion here. Ultimately, you can consider their inability to keep Willie Fritz as a failure, but sometimes, again, when the right job comes up, the right opportunity, everything kind of fits together, it's hard to really turn down. And that might have been what happened here. There might be a reason that none of us are discussing, to be honest with you, but I just want to keep pointing out that all of these reactions, you're allowed to be upset. You're allowed to be angry. I'm not policing any feelings here. I just want to bring perspective to the way that those messages are delivered and the way that social media exists today and how it affects players. You see NFL players talking about reading things online and seeing things that bother them. Those are full-grown adults making millions of dollars to play a sport as a profession. These are not student athletes that frontal lobes haven't developed yet. And just the emotions are running a lot different at that level than the NFL. So everything that you say on social media, players can see and internalize that. And they are the ones that are hurting the most out of anyone right now. A lot of these guys came to play for Willie Fritz. A lot of these guys feel like they owe their career to him. And it's just a really, really big void here that is just not going to be solved within a day. But I just want to mention, even though Tulane had 3 players enter the transfer portal, they only had 3 enter the transfer portal after, a pretty surprise departure, surprise debated one way or another. But in terms of not having that much foresight, except for the last kind of week of what were ultimately rumors until they were no longer. There's 458 players that are currently in the transfer portal right now, all across college football, all throughout Power 5 schools, all throughout teams that have no turnover at the top whatsoever. We live in an age where the transfer portal it's a little bit Wild West out there. And so for Tulane to have yes, they have an athletic director. He's not officially in his role. No long-term head coach outside the interim coach in Slade Nagel. They have only had 3 players enter the portal in a world where that is a record 458 players. And not only that, you've seen 2 players come out and commit not only to playing in this bowl, but play next season for the Green Wave in Tyler Grubbs and Cam Pettisflow. And those are 2 guys that they've had the least time here out of anyone. They both are from Louisiana, came back here. And I just remember hearing Tyler Grubbs in the spring practice press conference talking about how he really wanted to come play for a champion and a winner. And he saw all of those things in Tulane. And he wanted to go somewhere and see what those things are. So for someone like that to be the first guy to announce that he's not only playing in the bowl, but he's coming back next season, that says a lot to me about the culture that Willie Fritz and these players have all built. They're players that he's recruited both through high school and the transfer portal, and in the staff he hired that still remain. In the legacy built by the guys from last season in Nick Anderson, Dorian Williams, Tajay Spears, all of those guys, the guys that are these immense leaders on this year's team, Michael Pratt, Sincere Hainsworth, guys that came back for one more year. And now you have 2 key players in Cam Pettisflow and Tyler Grubbs already making that statement out there. That really speaks to culture. And that's something that Tulane just never has had. And it's something that you can attribute to what Willie Fritz's legacy is that he left behind as well. But when you build a really good culture, that culture shouldn't only rest with the caveat that you have to be at the top there in order for all of those philosophies, all of those things to still remain. And so for this culture to still really be existing here, for these guys to still be fighting, not only this year, but for next year, that means that all of this was all for nothing, or not all for nothing. That means that the legacy that has been left here is perpetuating. And the best thing that we can do right now in this moment is stand behind these guys and donate to things like Fear the Wave Collective and put things towards keeping the guys that you want to keep here in that position to do so. And when the new head coach comes out on Friday, then we could start this conversation over again. But this is the day that the transfer portal opens up. There is a rule again, when you lose your head coach, that there is basically no penalty for entering the transfer portal. And for Tulane to only see 3 guys and only one of those be a starter in Chris Brazel, yes, you could lose a lot of your quarterback room in Kai Horton and Carson Haggard, but that just speaks a lot to both what Willie Fritz has built here and the staff and the players that are still here today and are perpetuating that legacy for Tulane football. And that legacy has definitely perpetuated to the fan base as well. And I know that this is a really tough time for Tulane fans, and I will keep saying this. I'm not here to police feelings or to be overly positive and say that people just need to get over this, because I understand that that's nearly impossible for a lot of people and that this is still an extremely fresh wound. But one of the huge things for that consistent success and that program building, and something that Willie Fritz brought up all the time, was how important it is to have as equal sustained support from the community and from the fan base. And I just think that this is quite honestly the most critical moment in Tulane athletic history, to be honest with you. I mean, it wasn't hiring Willie Fritz because in the moment you didn't realize it at the time. That was arguably the most critical hire, the best coach in Tulane history. but the successor is just as, if not more important in that exact moment and for just, again, the future of this program as a whole. And I think the best way to just approach this is giving Tulane the opportunity to get it right again, because for all of the times they got it wrong, at the end of the day, they got it right with Willie Fritz, and they got 8 years of building a program and leaving behind a culture and a legacy and an idea of what winning and success looks like. And I think you're already seeing that transfusing through the players in that leadership role, in those guys like Tyler Grubbs and Cam Pettislow committing back to next year. But again, I said this at the beginning of the episode. Willie Fritz might have built the program and what it is for today, but he isn't the Tulane football program at the end of the day. Him leaving, it's not as if Tulane football ceases to exist in this moment. So again, I think that there is plenty of conversation to be had about, quite honestly, the reasons why he departed and what the university needs to do to be able to get the next hire right and keep them in the future and keep moving up the chain of success. Again, the goal ultimately should be getting into whatever the power XYZ 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 ends up being, and committing to sustaining that success at the next level. All of that really coming from that commitment to things like building the indoor practice facility. I think that is a fair criticism for people to have. And it's something that you have to think is being involved in the conversations between, these people up for this head coaching job and the university. But I will understand if people really are weary if nothing like that really gets announced, because I do think that played a large role in Willie's decision to ultimately depart. What they really have to do now is get it right. Again, this happens. You lose people to the transfer portal, you lose people to better jobs. And this is not just limited to college football. It's limited. Again, it's something that happens in every industry. And that next man up mentality that we've been talking about for Tulane all year, that really applies here. And it's just not the same program that Willie Fritz came in. Something that Sean Payton had brought up in that press conference was how he thought about how his mom would want him to be remembered by here, and going back to this idea of leaving a place better than when you left it. Ultimately, that's what Willie Fritz has done for Tulane. And as much as this stings now, what these last couple of seasons have felt like, I've seen people on Twitter in this last week talk about how they've seen, 10 or 11 bowl games in their entire time being alive. And Willie Fritz was responsible for 5 or 6 of those. I mean, when I went to Tulane, no one paid attention to the football team at all. Even when Yeoman Stadium was built, no one gave a crap about the football team. Everyone tailgated to tailgate and then go to the boot or go home. Maybe make it through one half. It just was not something that existed at Tulane. And for all of the talk about, the distraction and the rumors this week, the fan base showed up after flooding at a ridiculous level took place the same day of the game. And I just don't want that to be lost in the shuffle here, because it truly was just incredible here. And that's really the third most important thing here, is for Tulane moving forward to keep this culture and this legacy intact. And anything that people can do to play their role in that, I think just helps a lot. And maybe that is, again, grieving for a little bit, but maybe taking a step back and just seeing who Tulane hires next. It's not going to be necessarily the next Willie Fritz. And I think trying to compare someone to him is going to be a losing battle, but giving that person a fair opportunity to come in here and make their own legacy, because this is a job that people want, as opposed to taking it kind of in spite of everything going on. Thinking back to David Harris's opening press conference saying that once this job became open for Tulane, he immediately reached out to put feelers out, and this was a job that he wanted to take. That's a sentiment that's being expressed among a lot of Tulane football, and that is something that's still intact here. But the team is still intact here. The staff is still intact here, save for the head coach. And I think supporting these guys through this final game is really what's going to be super important here, because we shouldn't stop supporting this program because Willie Fritz left. You can fairly criticize one person, a party, what have you, and hold those feelings, but these players deserve the support that they've gotten all year, and to feel that legacy still be something that they are playing a role in, and not feel like it was all for nothing this season. So I just love what happened over these last couple of years. Wait and see what's next to come, but recognize how hard this is for these players and how much Willie Fritz really meant to a lot of them. I was so proud of Jaquan Jackson. You know, we had a bowl selection watch party at 11 a.m. on Sunday, and the players had just been informed by Willie Fritz prior to that he was going to be departing for Houston. So for them to really be there at all was just really, I just felt such strength emanating through all of them. And, you know, on that same exact day, just an hour later, Jaquan Jackson is talking with the media about what Willie Fritz really meant to him and this program. And that is easier said than done. And it just continues to show that this culture and legacy isn't gone yet. But this Willie Fritz meant a lot to a lot of these guys. You know, Jaquan Jackson brought up how he didn't have the ACT scores to get in here, but Willie Fritz stuck with him, and he has no idea where he would have been today if not for Willie Fritz. Tajay Spears told me the exact same story when I was interviewing him to write for him for the draft last year, of the same situation with not having the ACT scores to get in, signing him anyways, saying that he believed in him and knew that he had what it took. And I think you could get that story for so many guys across this program. I think that there are a lot of guys that came to play at Tulane for Willie Fritz, that transferred from other programs to come play for Willie Fritz. And they are feeling a really, really hard void right now. But I said this again when Sean Payton departed, and I'll stop bringing up his name. But I said this, you know, how lucky are we to feel this heartbroken about the departure of a great quarterback and an all-time great head coach? A lot of teams never get to have that feeling. And, you know, we are experiencing pretty much that exact situation now at Tulane. You know, we have no idea what the future holds for Michael Pratt. If he ends up transferring, if he ends up going to the draft, and if he decides to sit out of the bowl game to get healthy for the draft. I mean, we know how much of a warrior Michael Pratt is, and I wouldn't blame him for whatever decision that he made. But, you know, to feel like I just experienced the best head coach and the best quarterback in Tulane history all in one fell swoop, it's something that is rare to come across. And I expressed these sentiments on Twitter, but, you know, Willie Fritz has really done a lot for me as a person, my confidence, and what I feel like I am at in my career today, where I walked into training camp 2 years ago, knowing absolutely nobody and feeling comfortable from the get-go. And I remember, you know, I was around the guys on the team when I was at Tulane, and it just felt like a different caliber of human being was all throughout the program under Willie Fritz. And then your first impression with Willie Fritz, said this, but it just feels like he's someone that you've known a lot longer than that first meeting. And every Tuesday when we would meet with him, our broadcast crew behind closed doors, you know, he was candid with us. He answered any question that he had. He joked with us. He asked us about, you know, our lives, our families. We would just visit there and talk sometimes for 20 minutes here and there, sometimes not that much about football. I am someone that has a potential interest in coaching. And this exact time last year, well, the week of the championship game, I'll be honest, when the rumors of Willie Fritz started swirling to Georgia Tech, I, you know, kind of panicked just because, you know, I felt like I was still kind of ingraining myself in this program, and he was someone that I knew super well, and his loss was really going to hit hard, and that I had all these things that I still wanted to ask him and learn about Tulane football. And so in our final broadcast meeting that year, I just kind of blurted out that I had an interest in coaching, and, you know, if I could just kind of talk to him about that. And he proceeded to stay behind with me for 20 more minutes and, you know, talk with me, ask me, you know, what I've kind of done so far, and telling me what he's given advice to similar women that have come to him in this position, and that those 3 women have all gone to work for NFL teams in different capacities. And like I said, that next week I was sitting in on special teams meetings, on defensive coordinator meetings, defensive back meetings, just learning so much, and doing the same thing over spring practice. This last year with training camp and, you know, everything kind of going on in my life, and this show too, kind of adding on to my repertoire, had a little less time to go to those meetings, but just to have that opportunity to be inside a meeting room, to see how different coaches approach things, to see how Sheil Wood came in and taught these guys and installed his new things back in the spring. You know, I've gotten so many opportunities as a result of Willie Fritz. And when everything came out recently about sideline reporters at halftime, I think there was a very, very valid conversation that we all kind of missed the mark on unfortunately, because of the way that the message was framed. But I don't think that Carissa Thompson is the only person that a coach has totally blown off at halftime. And I think that there is an equal conversation that should have been had about why that is and why that shouldn't be happening. I can tell you every game in the 2-10 year was tense. I was definitely a lot less comfortable getting into those meetings. I was also kind of finding my own footing on the sideline in general. But, the last thing I wanted to do was add additional stress on to a head coach when his team is just not doing well. And there has never been a moment where I not only felt like, I might have to ad lib here, but that I felt uncomfortable asking him that question at all. And quite honestly, I wouldn't have been offended if at any point he said, I really have nothing to say. And then that's what I said on air. But just knowing that Willie Fritz would never do that, that he respected our broadcast crew and what we worked on, day in and day out, and giving us the information and confidence that he did, because, we had really spent the time building that trust. And it's a tough situation for everyone now. If they hire internally, it makes it a lot easier for everyone that's already here. But if they hire externally, then we're all kind of back to square one. And that's just kind of a difficult world for everyone to be living in this time. But when I moved down to New Orleans, I had no idea really what I was going to do in sports, in my future. And I lost out on an opportunity right before I got this Tulane job. And I came in very much with a chip on my shoulder and still kind of getting over this feeling of bitterness and that, I was passed over for this opportunity. I'm not someone that says things happen for a reason, because I've seen too many things happen without reason that I just can't get behind that. But that wasn't the right job for me. This Tulane job was, and I got to witness the greatest single season turnaround in college football history right up close and see really what it takes to do just that. But so did all of these players on the team. So did all the coaching staff that was here. I mean, if I can opine on this as a broadcaster on my podcast, then everyone that's inside the building has that infused in them tenfold. So again, it's a really tough time to be a Tulane football fan. It's a sad time to be a Tulane football fan. I don't really know if this is all kind of hit me yet, but my job as a sideline reporter does not change whatsoever here. And if anything, again, I feel like it's more important to be there, be present, and be loud and supportive for these players than it ever has been in Tulane history. And as much as there are negatives to be seen here, I'm always someone that tries to at least find a silver lining. And to me, the commitments that we've already seen, the way that those guys battled like warriors until the final snap during what was a very just miserable game from, for the most of the game. And just looking at someone like Michael Pratt, where his final pass, potentially in a Tulane uniform, but at least at Yulman Stadium, was a drop pass in the end zone to Alex Bauman, someone who made that game-winning touchdown catch in the Cotton Bowl last year, someone who's going to feel that probably harder than he should for everything that went wrong in that game. And the first thing Michael Pratt does is go over there and comfort him. And the way that these guys have been there for each other on Sunday, during that game, on the sideline, there were a lot of things that, emotions were high on that sideline. And just continues to speak to how important Willie Fritz was to Tulane University. And none of that is going to change as much as this departure stings. So I'm going to just kind of end my tangent now. Like I said, this season isn't done yet, and these guys still have one more 1-0 on this year. And I just know that they really, really want to show that what happened last Saturday isn't the lasting impression that they want on Tulane fans as what this season means to them and what they've been able to accomplish. 11-1 is a hell of a freaking accomplishment for any team, let alone Tulane football, especially on the heels of that 12-2 year. Willie Fritz has a lot to do with that. He's ultimately he can't control a single thing that happens on the field. He even said this. The coaches could put together the best game plan possible. It's on the players to execute. And these players have executed, and they have led through a season of turnover from success. And they're seeing that again now before the season's even finished yet. So the mental toughness that's being built here, that to me is a legacy that just can't be matched. And it's just that much more important that we support these guys that are still here. So we'll see what we do for this Friday episode, depending on if and when, a coach is announced. But I just want to leave this with everyone that you love New Orleans and it'll love you back. And you love these Tulane players and they'll love you back as well. And I think that's really what you've seen happen this season, and the fan base, even more so than last year, really being behind these guys. And I just hope that that continues to perpetuate as the true legacy of Tulane football.
5-yard penalty.
I just wanted to record a quick disclaimer here, and I've already kind of changed into my night gear, if you will, with my glasses and jacket on. But I talked about two players returning for Tulane in Cam Pettisflow and Tyler Grubbs. I just wanted to correct myself on Cam Pettisflow being a grad transfer. So he, I believe, is out of eligibility and he committed to just playing in the bowl. It's Tyler Grubbs that committed to both the bowl game and coming back next year. But it still speaks a lot to the leadership of a guy like Cam Pettisflow that has been here for a season. And I believe, kind of understood the importance in a message like that today. And it just goes to show that this is a bowl game that players of that caliber value, because let's be honest, Macon Clark leaving and then Andre Sam coming in for him, then him going on to LSU. And that anchor role was a huge void for Tulane, and Cam Pettisflow came in really late in the off season, really only being there for fall camp, missing the installs of spring camp. And what he's been able to do, the ability to just completely shut down LeJontay Wester and FAU, a lot of that was attributed to Cam Pettisflow really reading and keying off of him in that game, his ability to blitz and shut down the run game. So him coming and playing in that bowl game, that is a statement in and of itself. Tyler Grubbs then just deserving that much more flowers for being the guy to come out today and make that really strong statement. The way that he spoke in that spring practice press conference, I kind of felt, okay, this guy sounds a little Nick Anderson-esque. And I think anyone that's heard him in interviews, in post-game press conferences, he spoke really brilliantly after the Ole Miss loss. That one I really recall as being another one of those moments. And to me, there's no better follow-up to a guy that literally stepped into his shoes on the field than someone like Tyler Grubbs coming out and making that statement today.